Hello, wild ones. We are so glad that you're here on this Monday morning. It is another episode of Her Huddles. We want to know how you're greeting the week, and we're going to get into it today, just knocking out of the park from the start. We decided to have this episode kick off a 5-part series on the most Googled wellness questions right now. So the ones that people are quietly searching, maybe at night, maybe on the toilet, who knows when, but when they don't feel okay, but don't fully know why. Not from a perfection lens, not from a fix yourself lens, but from a lens of what actually is happening and being human right now lens. That's the conversation we're going to get into. And so this first one is, why am I so tired all the time? Jen and I are not sleep experts. We'll put it out there from the start. I am terrible actually with sleep, so I'll own that too. But this gets into if you've been feeling tired in a way that sleep doesn't touch, you're not only the one asking this question. And so we really want to know, what are the reasons why? What are some of the feelings? Maybe the answers, but really to create this identity around living in a time where exhaustion is often the signal and not the problem itself. So really saying, okay, if I feel exhausted or tired all the time, what is it signaling? And is it actually a sleep issue, or is it something else going on? And we're going to hold this with enough grace. And please let me say, you're not broken for asking this question. It's being asked by many. And we're going to try and, we're more on the curious hunt for it, for the answers. But before we get there, what is the unpopular opinion?
I've got a fashion one for us today, which is really not my area of.
I was going to say.
So let's just start with that. So the unpopular opinion today is the classic fashion convention on white pants. So wearing white pants is that they are only to be worn between Memorial Day, which is like end of May, the last weekend of May in the US, through Labor Day, which is like the first weekend of September in the US. So really, it's like June, July, August is when it's appropriate or fashionably acceptable to wear white pants. What do we think?
I'm going to say you do you, boo. However, the reason I laughed when you brought up, like, I'm not really a fashionista, I'm like, you're more fashion focused than I am and fashion forward than I am. So I'm like in the wrong place to say this. However, I kind of do think, as much as I'm like, people do your own thing. So that's what I would say. If I see someone come over to my house, I would never say anything. Ever, I think it doesn't make it cringy, but I think I follow this trend actually, or this social format. I don't wear white pants that often, but when I do, like my white shorts or like a few different things that I have, it is only during that time.
So you're like subconsciously calling it a.
Believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? Back at you.
I think I'm similar, although I would almost extend the window a tad. So maybe I'm going to go a little opposite and say I feel like it's almost like Easter for me is when like end of April, beginning of April is sort of when I feel like if it's hot enough, like it's going to be 85 in the next couple of days or something. And I'm like, hey, I'd wear a pair of white pants.
Yeah. And we're not to Memorial Day, but we're close. So, okay. I'm with you on that. Here's maybe something. I don't wear white pants, like I said. One, because again, this is Her Huddles. We're going to get into it. I was so nervous as a teen and like young adult, and I think you already know where I'm going. Wearing white pants and my period hits, that is like jarring to me. Like that would have like just made me, although it's a natural thing, although it happens to many of us, like
Mortified.
mortified. That's one. Number two, I won't say what year because that just doesn't feel appropriate, but I had a teacher in elementary school and she wore white pants with colorful thongs. And guess what? We as kids talked about her colorful panties. I know. So white pants as a whole has much more. That question led into far more for me than maybe it was supposed to. But nonetheless, that is
maybe the real unpopular opinion is something more about what color panties need to be worn with white pants.
Yes. Match your skin color. That's what I'm going to say. Match your skin color. That's my vote. Or maybe don't, but then know that there's going to be upper elementary kids talking about your outfit. All right, so you can see where I come from, but nonetheless, I'm with
Hey,
you.
we keep it real. We're keeping it real.
That's right. That's right. I say do it. The other thing that I would say though is if it's a skirt or if it's other things, rock it all year round. But there is something about pants that I think is a faux pas if you don't. So I don't know the history of it. That'd be fun to know. Like why.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know. I don't know either.
So something for the future. All right. Then getting into the rest. We're going to go into this question of why am I so tired all the time? And not just sleepy, not just needing a vacation, but that deeper exhaustion that sleep doesn't seem to fix. We've talked about some of these things in the past of life hacks of like remove my phone from the side of my bed. Check. That would make a lot of sense. But before like we even get into sleep or how it affects us, what we're really getting at is why am I so tired? Why do I feel off? Yeah. Why am I engaging in the world feeling like, ugh? And so for some of us, you might be like, I have full energy. I'm a person who operates on go, 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 like Energizer Bunny. And so that's why, again, I say that's separate from sleep. We are not sleep experts. And really looking at the psychology of why this question is everywhere right now. Do you feel like in your own life, sleep or not even sleep? I see, I keep tripping up on that even is this idea of exhaustion, even if sleep is good, that you feel tired. Does that show up in your life right now? Or are you like, no, I'm actually feeling like my energy is higher?
It does show up in my life at different points, and I think the sleep is such a big part of it, and also too, I think one of the things that I experience is almost like decision exhaustion, and that feels like another contributor for me often. Even if my sleep was, like, great, I'm like, "Why am I still exhausted?" And then I'm, like, trying to interrogate, like, what other things in my life could make me feel this tired if I'm theoretically getting good sleep.
For sure. I just Googled, as you may have seen or heard, as you were sharing that, because I'm like, that's it. That's like one of the clear answers we see psychologically. And so it says adults, again, GTS this, Google this stuff. Adults make an estimated 35,000 remotely conscious decisions per day. Is that true? I don't know. But let's say even if Google's off, even if Google, we take 10% of that. That's still 3,500. So if Google's crazy off, which usually they're not because of what they pull from, but nonetheless, 3,500 all up to 35,000 decisions, maybe even more, that we are consciously making. Do I take a step? Do I brush my teeth? Do I call this person? Do I put on this coat? Do I, right? Like all these different things. Do I say these next words, right? Like aside from breathing and my heart rate going, autonomics and the internal things of my body, most of this is conscious. And so I'm like, yeah, that feels tiring in itself.
Yeah, 100%.
And so then we get back to this question again of why am I feeling tired all the time? And it's really about capacity rather than sleep. And so decision fatigue is a very real thing in saying, okay, my capacity right now is not to hold 15 different events and have family over and do X, Y, or Z, but actually to take a weekend off. Or it's to say, hey, let me grab this book and escape into the book or go for a run. Or maybe my conscious decisions are one foot in front of the other, or do I take a left or a right, but it's very minimalist? Or do I just sit outside and have sun on my face?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask some questions and then curious on this of when people ask, why am I so tired all the time? They're often really asking, why does everything feel like too much? Why can't I recover the same way I used to? Why do I feel behind in my own life? So playing catch up. Why does rest not feel restful anymore? And so this is where psychology gets interesting. So before we get into the psychology of it, when I said, why can't I recover the way I used to? I feel that like I'm entering a new season where I'm like, man, I can power through better than I used to because I understand when to say yes and when to say no more.
Mm.
But I'm like, if I take a night out or if I don't give myself respite and rest, I'm like old girl, like old gray Mary, what she used to be. I'm like, here we go. I can't hang with the best anymore or whatever. So for you, do you feel like recovery looks different now or that you just don't feel it or more of like, I just don't understand what's happening in my body?
I do think it looks different. I it looks different, and I think recovery almost even too for me, like naming what I'm trying to recover. Am I trying to recover my mind and like my mental state or my emotional state or my physical body? how I would recover is very different depending on the answer. And so I try to think about that. And then I think too, we all know this, the onset of technology, I feel like at even 18, what I could do to recover or feel rejuvenated looks so different now, and I don't even know that I have it fully figured out now other than, like, leave the phone. Leave it.
Yes. Yeah, mic drop right there. And let's get into that before we get into the digital. I mean, we talked about digital fasting, right? That was something in February that we went through, and that's one to revisit for sure because that's the overstimulation. So let's go there in a minute. Before we get there, I love what psychology shows is for many of us when we're in our teens and 20s, it's like, I'm exhausted. Or even now, it's like, I'm exhausted. And again, I go back to the physical, back to the sleep. Oh, I just need to rest more physically. Oh, I just need to take time away physically. But what we're seeing actually is that isn't always that physical depletion. That in fact, sometimes it's the emotional load that you mentioned, it's the cognitive overload, that decision fatigue that we started with, the chronic stress activation, this idea that our nervous system is always on. And that's where we talk about for Gen Alpha and like the generations to come, they're the first generations that are overstimulated and are stimulated from the time they wake up in the morning till the time they go to bed. Because if they're not on a phone, other people are on a phone.
Yeah.
And there's this constant stimulation of how do we support kids? What do we need to do? What does that look like? So for Gen Alpha, it really is, and beyond, it's going to be how do I go play a sport? How do I sit and read a book for a long time? How do I sit over a cup of coffee or well, obviously for kids, not that, but like sitting and and chatting or, playing with the dog for hours on end or back in the backyard or whatever it may be, but something that is just calming where there's no sounds aside from nature. There's no visual stimuli aside from nature. There's the physical is nature in itself, right? And all of these as we go through the senses are nature, nature, nature. And so we're seeing that of like this chronic stress activation is happening across the board at all times for them. And so what does that look like then for us who grew up with it without our cell phones? Like this bad boy, I'm holding up my phone right now. Like that's with me at all times. Even on this phone call, it is, or this video call, it's 6 inches away from my body.
Yeah.
Right? And so what type of signals am I getting that I don't even know, but my body's reverberating and feeling? And so to your point, and then the last one is identity fatigue,
Hmm.
trying to be everything to everyone.
Mm.
And I don't know how you feel about that, but I'll go into my story and then curious on which one of these feels in this moment for today, feels like it's hitting the most. And I know you talked about decision fatigue and stuff, but is for me, this idea of fatigue is not that I want to be everything to everybody. However, Mother's Day, right, has coming on. And it's one of those things where I like love my kids, so grateful. And I know each of us are on our own journey as far as wanting to be a mother or becoming a mother or loss or being an 87-year-old grandmother, whatever it might be. But nonetheless, like wherever we're on our journey, I love my kids. I am so out touched though in this season as I hold space for other things that I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to teach them to be more independent because I feel like right now when I get too overwhelmed or when I feel like, man, I got a great night's sleep and I'm so exhausted. Well, that's because actually I feel like I'm being pulled in 15 different directions. So for me, that last one hits a lot of the different roles I play and how I'm being pulled. What about you? Emotional load, cognitive overload, or doubling down on that stress from the phones or nervous system? And then identity fatigue. Which one's hitting you right now?
I think mine's like cognitive right now. I would almost say I'm such an ideas person, and I was actually just thinking about this the other day how I said to my husband, I said, I'm feeling really exhausted by my own ideas and like my own creativity. Like I just have so many things, possibilities, ideas in my head, and I'm like looking around and I'm like, this is exhausting. And it's just like it's like a good thing, and maybe that's a reminder that, like, you can be exhausted by even a good thing. Like, a good thing can still exhaust you.
Yeah, that's good.
And I yeah, and I think sometimes we separate exhausted to or it wouldn't maybe attribute exhaustion to a good thing, but it can be.
Yeah, if I'm hearing you right, it's like exhaustion. We, in my mind, or what you're getting at is it's usually like we use the word debt or depletion or less than.
Right,
Maybe it's
right.
actually the overactivation of
Too much of.
Too much of. Yeah, exactly. Like the overstimulation, too much of,
Mm.
rather than maybe in the past it was like, "Oh, my body doesn't have enough energy," or, "Oh, I don't have enough resources," which sometimes that's the case for people, or, "I don't have enough of," and instead it's like, "Oh my gosh, I have so much of X that I actually don't have a place to channel it and put it." And so for you, would that be going out and just painting, or like how do you, or yeah, I know you journal, right? Like getting all of that out in a creative way, journaling or with colors or something. I don't know. Of like, all right, Jen's just going to take Saturday morning to go and just sit and be in nature or out front on your beautiful patio with your dog by your side or whatever, and just like get that stuff out of your head and onto paper so you're not holding that existence.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. It's yeah, it's like a full escape, a mental escape, a cognitive escape. I love your idea of a book. I can't remember the last time where I've been so gripped by a book that I'm just like, fully in the pages and like in the story. And I feel like that would be another really great outlet. Is just like go get a fire book and be consumed by that story, whatever it is.
So good. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's going back to your point again, is with phones and digital world, reading is one of the one things that has been removed from society because it's like, oh, how long does it take to get into a book? Where do I find it? Or do I choose just it? Like, it's so much easier again to pick up the phone and be like, oh, and then so many.
Press play on a podcast. Yeah.
Totally, and they're good things, right? To your point where I'm like, I get on Instagram, I'm like, "Look at these whales, look at these family members, look at these, like, super cool space, like, pictures of the astronauts going and, like, so cool." So it doesn't matter what the food, amazing food, or it's, "Oh, great, I'll respond to these emails that are really, like, really important for work," or maybe it's a phone call, or you just talked about podcasts, right? Like, let's not call let's call it what it is, and saying like, okay, sometimes we're over engaged or don't have enough time because we're engaging with good things. And so how do we replace it though for something that is life giving in a restful way rather than life giving in a cognitive stimulating way, which again is important and serves its purpose. But how do I rest?
Yes, that distinction I think is so critical. And I don't know that I mean, I personally don't put enough thought into that. I don't, I'm like, I just think it's like, it's a good thing I'm listening to my fifth podcast of the day. And it's like, well, wait a second. Is it, is it restful to you though? And I don't know that it is because it just like keeps my brain humming. And I'm just like, it doesn't actually regenerate me or fill my cup. It just is like continuing the hamster cycle that's happening in my brain.
Yes. And I go on, like, I have a commitment that I'll read 1 book a month, and sometimes it's more, and it can be audiobook, but I really trying to read physical books.
Cool.
So I in that, Nick and I went in March and celebrate end of March and celebrated our 10-year anniversary. Awesome. Went to Mexico and I was like, okay, in this 3-day period, I'm gonna read a book. And then we went to Nashville for his work, and I'm like, okay, great. In this 3 or 4 day period, I'm gonna read a book. And one was on marketing and like other business stuff, but it still was a fascinating read. And the other one was on just like total trash, like smut, but it was a fun beach
Love
read.
it.
And I'm like, I realize that I have so many other things that I've put in on my plate when I'm home.
Yeah.
But if those things are restful for me, even something that does cognitively stimulate myself, like marketing and trying to learn it and all that, yet how it was written in a creative way and things like that, I'm like, I felt more rested reading that book in this space. And so starting to think through like, why is that? Like
Yeah.
what are the reasons? And so I'm in a place in my journey of like awareness to say I am exhausted from my phone. We've talked about this in previous podcasts. Like I need to not look at geopolitical things at 9 o'clock at night. Why would someone torture themselves and do that? However, like that's my reality. And so I've moved away from that. So I have enough awareness to say, hey, I need to unplug sooner in the day. However, am I replacing it with healthy opportunities, engagements, habits?
Yeah. It sounds like from what you're saying, almost doing some sort of like audit of like what is trying to identify what the thing is that is causing the exhaustion. And I guess the reality is that it's probably multiple things, but like would you say for you the phone is probably the biggest one?
So one of the things that I like researched when we were talking about this is this idea that we're constantly reachable now.
Yeah.
and information is constantly reachable. And before, like, even on my own childhood, my mom had an encyclopedia, a dictionary that we would use, and outside of that, that is the only information we would know unless we watched, Channel 9 News in the evenings or 60 Minutes or something like that. But that was it. There wasn't like, "Oh, let me learn about X, Y, and Z times a billion." And now my phone, I'm a super nerdy human, and so I'm like, "Let me learn about this." Or I hear you say, on white pants, I'm like, "What's the history of white pants?" Right? Like, so nerdy, but it's true. I am curious and my brain goes that way. And so in the past, same with like being reachable by other people, not just that, but the information and the overload there, I couldn't be reached by X, Y, and Z, socials, whatever. And on the flip side, I couldn't reach other people. Or if I did, it was one person at a time, making sure that my sister wasn't using the phone, that my parents weren't using the phone. And it was a quick, hey, let's connect so then we can figure out where we're going to meet up. And
Yeah.
so just that piece, I hope that's painting the picture where like, I think that's it for me is that information and relationships are constant.
Mhm.
And I have to believe that we weren't designed for that. Like that and I know certainly for thousands, for millennia, we haven't engaged like that. And so
Yeah.
what is that doing to our body? And I'd venture to say that that's one of those reasons is that we're constantly reachable. Another one is that rest is no longer uninterrupted.
Mm.
Right? Like how often do we I'll go into this. South Africa, and I'd be curious if in Peru or other places that you've been. In South Africa, they have braais, they call them, and it's this idea that you show up for a meal
Mm.
and you sit and you stay, and there's no other agenda, and it's not like here where it's like, "Hey, I've got 1 hour. Let's meet at Chipotle." No knock on Chipotle, but it's like, "Let's do fast casual." And at that 1 hour, "Bye, love you," even if you're my closest friend.
Yeah.
And so this idea of a braai or these other hangouts, right? It might be equivalent to a barbecue. That is what it's equivalent to. But I just feel like culturally, it's different where it's come, commune, be. And that's being interrupted by cell phones and everything down there too. So please hear me say, like, they're not immune to it. But I'd be curious in the Latin American culture and in your experiences, what have you seen as far as gatherings and uninterrupted places of calm? Assuming gatherings are calm, I guess. Here's my extroverted self saying that gatherings and family gatherings are really wonderful to me and friends, and I feel like often they're rushed.
Yeah, my experience, I feel like I see that a lot in Latin America, which is just like it's often around the meal, and yeah, it's there's no end date or end timestamp, and the- it's sometimes I get impatient. I find myself getting impatient. I'm like, okay, I think I've done it, seen it, talked to everybody, and to just like really truly sit, like you said, with no agenda and just, like, enjoy. Yeah, it's like a lost art, I feel like.
Oh, that's a beautiful way and a very accurate way to say it's a lost art. Like, what else? What am I missing? Like, how have
Right.
I forgotten about the craft of that? So, yeah, that would be something that I would say. And then downtime, right, is filled with stimulation. How many of us, instead of going to a book, instead of laying in the sun, instead of picking up, I don't know, just like for me, I'm like, oh, my kids are so good at downtime. Like, their world is downtime
Yeah.
and they fill their time beautifully. And I'm like, in my downtime, I need to take a page out of your book because I'm quick to my phone again to see what texts I missed, what phone calls I might have, what emails I might have. And oh, if I don't have any of those, if there's no red notification there, let me just see what socials say. Oh,
Totally.
let me just find my trigger thumb going off, like trying to figure out what to do. So that loss. And then the last one is emotional processing often gets postponed. And I want us to sit in this for a minute because things will happen, but because we're stimulated and stacked on by all these other things, whatever has happened to us emotionally, large or small, is like, "Oh, yeah, I'll get to processing this subconsciously, but I'll get to processing this right after I get to that text,
Mhm.
right after I get to that email,
Yeah.
right after I, binge watch whatever." And it's like, "Oh, if I didn't have my phone here, if we go back 20, 30 years, which is not that far, that's our lifetime, then it's like we were forced to face some of these things, and sometimes we'd go to booze, sometimes we'd go to marijuana, sometimes we'd go to X, Y, or Z that maybe isn't as healthy either.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, we'd have to face it in a different way,
Right.
And so I think anxiety is I would argue that anxiety is creeping up, depression is inclining, excuse me, is inclining more and more because we're not processing our emotions
Yeah.
or we're postponing them until we're so exhausted.
Right. We're too exhausted to even sort of carve out the space to do it, which is not easy work.
And I shared this a couple episodes back with John on He Said, She Said, but I feel like it's these embers. We were talking about in communication, but it's and having a seat at the table, but it's these embers where if and let me paint the picture. So, do I hold an ember in my soul or do I hold a wildfire? An ember
Mm,
can be easily put out, right? At the end of a barbie, at the end of a s'mores night or whatever, I put that out.
yeah.
But if I don't, 15, so many other embers start and start and start and start. And I've had all this dormant life happened, loose leaves, all these things laying there dry as can be. And those embers start to spark fire. And is it easier to calm and put out a wildfire? Or is it easier to calm and put out embers? Right? I think that's what is happening in our souls and in our lives is even for emotional things that aren't the most grievous situations, but are little
Yeah.
spikes in our systems when we don't address those little spikes continue to grow, grow, grow,
Build.
grow, grow, and we have a wildfire situation of an emotion. And
Yeah.
so really just trying to say like, "Hey, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we become more aware to your point?" So,
Yeah. And oh, maybe worth just a plug here to consider this if you're feeling exhausted is to consider the practice of Sabbath. We talk about this in our personal lives, but Sabbath sort of comes from this Christian belief and this Jesus tradition that life is designed to be enjoyable and restful, and that is part of our human experience here on earth. And Sabbath, which is a practice that you can sort of define how it looks for you and what makes up Sabbath and what defines a restful Sabbath. But that might be something to look into if you are open to a Sabbath practice, which is like a day of rest, intentional.
yeah, great plug for that. That's something Nick and I and Lauren is on a couple weeks back. So if you go back and listen, Lauren Z-Tech and she talks fully on Sabbath, which is awesome.
Oh,
And so for all our community, our wild ones, please do listen to that. And I think it was released on May 15th. So or excuse me, May it would have been the week before that, May 7th. So go listen to that. But yeah, just a really good practice. And so I think to your point of like, what is draining me that I can't name when I have Sabbath, or actually carve out time to even process that question of what is draining me that I
mhm.
haven't named. Then we can give that answer. Maybe it's lack of boundaries or responsibilities, things we just talked about. And then this idea of sometimes the body says, I'm tired, when the mind hasn't had the space to say, I'm overwhelmed.
Mm,
I'm going to repeat that again. Sometimes the body says, I'm tired. And that is our initial awareness into the mind saying, actually, I'm overwhelmed. And my body is responding to that because our physical is the entry into our entire body. And so if we have that response physically, something's happening internally as well.
yeah.
So, all right, with that, what is the journal prompt that you have for the day?
Yeah, the journal prompt for the day is if my exhaustion is a messenger, what has it been trying to tell me that I keep ignoring?
The beautiful part that's sticking out initially to me in this is it creates a gentleness. It reframes I'm enough, like I'm not less than, and it reframes what's wrong with my energy into what's draining me that I haven't named yet, like we just talked about and that you brought up. But really, this gentleness, this reframing of saying it's a messenger, it's a friend, it's a person or an object to say, hey, something's going on. I see you.
Mhm.
And then gently to say, like, hey, what am I? I'm not weak, but I feel exhausted. Why is that?
Yeah.
So beautiful. All right, you want to take us out, and then that's the end of it.
Yeah, thank you everybody. I really hope that this episode just allows you to think about maybe the sources of where exhaustion is coming from in your life, and you're not alone in your exhaustion. Like Becca said, this is one of the most, if not the most commonly googled question. So you are alongside thousands of people who also feel exhausted. So we're here to make sure you don't feel alone in that, but also give you some ideas about how you can get out of it or make it a little bit better. So I hope you all have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next time. Cheers, friends.
Will y'all? See ya.